Part 1. The Biology of the Ogre. To understand the creature, we must first understand the metaphor, a metaphor provided by the specimen himself, yet often dismissed as mere poetry or defensive wit. Ogres are like onions. Consider this statement not as a deflection, but as a biological confession, a roadmap to the anatomy of the ogreus swampus. While the layperson hears this comparison and thinks of personality, of hidden depths and emotional walls, the xenobiologist hears something quite different. They hear a description of dermal stratification. They hear a clue regarding the very evolution of a species designed to withstand the harsh, damp, and hostile environments of the fairy tale wetlands. Skin of an ogre is not merely a covering. It is a suit of biological armor, composed of calloused sheets that have formed, hardened, and separated over time, much like the rings of a tree, or indeed the scales of an onion bulb. A blunt object, say a pitchfork or a torch handle, strikes an ogre. The force is not transferred directly to the muscle and bone. Instead, the outer layer slides. It absorbs the kinetic energy, shifting independently of the layers beneath, dissipating the impact. It is the same principle used in modern tank armor, spaced plating designed to confuse and diffuse incoming energy. The ogre does not just have thick skin, he has a floating defense system, layer upon layer of shock absorption. Now, let us drift deeper, past the surface, into the greenness of the creature. The pigmentation of the ogre is a subject of much debate. Why green? Some posit it is due to a symbiotic relationship with moss or algae living within the keratin of the skin. However, the onion metaphor suggests a more intrinsic biological source. Just as an onion changes color as you peel it, from the brown, papery exterior to the white or purple flesh, finally to the green sprout at the center, the ogre's layers may possess varying pigmentations that culminate in the signature chartreuse hue we observe. It is highly probable that the green coloration is not melanin as seen in humans, but a concentration of biliverdin, a bile pigment produced by the breakdown of hemoglobin. In humans, this is what gives a healing bruise its greenish-yellow tint. In ogres, this compound may be a permanent fixture of their dermal chemistry. Circulating through the vascular system and settling in the subcutaneous layers. Why? Biliverdin is a potent antioxidant. For a creature living in a swamp, surrounded by decay, bacteria, and fungal spores, having a skin infused with natural antioxidants would be an immense evolutionary advantage, a chemical barrier reinforcing the physical one. The layers continue. We move from the protective outer husks to the insulative inner strata. An onion, when cut, releases a volatile gas,
syn-propanethiol S-oxide, which causes the eyes to tear. It is a defense mechanism to discourage predators from eating the bulb. We must ask ourselves, does the ogre possess a similar chemical defense located between his layers? This brings us to the topic of the ogre's scent. Often described as offensive or swampy, this musk is likely not a result of poor hygiene, but a biological imperative released from the pockets between the skin layers. Much like the onion releases its irritant when breached, the ogre may release pheromones and sulfurous compounds when agitated or threatened. These compounds are trapped in the interstitial spaces we discussed earlier. When the ogre moves, stretches, or flexes his massive muscular structure, the layers compress, squeezing these microscopic pockets and releasing a scent that signals to every creature in the vicinity, stay away. It is a solitary biology.
The anatomy of the ogre is designed for isolation. The layers create a barrier between the self and the world, a physical manifestation of the ogre's desire for privacy. Let us contrast this with the alternative metaphor proposed by the companion animal, the donkey. Cakes. Everybody loves cakes. Parfaits. Why are these taxonomically incorrect? Biologically speaking, a cake is a mixture. The flour, the sugar, the eggs, they are beaten until they are indistinguishable from one another. They become a porous, singular matrix. A parfait is similar, though it has layers. They are soft, permeable, and blend into one another with time and gravity. If an ogre were like a cake, a strike to the arm would bruise the bone. If an ogre were like a parfait, the swamp water would seep into his core, lowering his body temperature and inviting infection. The donkey, being a herd animal with a simple single-layer hide covered in fur, cannot comprehend the necessity of the onion structure. He sees the layers as a flaw or a culinary preference rather than a survival necessity. But the ogre knows. The ogre understands that to survive the torches and the pitchforks, one must be segmented, one must be built of many shields. We must also consider the thermal properties of this layered existence. The swamp is a damp environment, prone to chilling mists at night and humid heat during the day. A single thick layer of blubber, like that of a whale, is good for cold, but poor for heat regulation. However, the onion structure allows for trapped air. Air is an excellent insulator. By trapping thin pockets of air and lipids between the dermal sheets, the ogre maintains a perfect homeostasis. He is a walking thermos. This explains why Shrek is comfortable in a vest and rough-spun cloth in the dead of winter, yet does not overheat when traveling through dragon-guarded volcanoes. The layers regulate. The layers adapt. There is a tactile memory to the onion, the crisp snap of the outer skin, the wet crunch of the inner rings. While we do not see the ogre molt in the traditional sense, it is likely that the life cycle of these layers is continuous. As the innermost layers, closest to the blood supply and rapid cell generation, grow, they push the older layers outward.
Over years, the inner skin becomes the outer armor. This suggests that the ogre carries his history on the surface of his body. The skin that brushes against a tree today was 5 years ago, deep within the safety of his own tissue. This slow migration of cells from the soft, vulnerable core to the hardened, weathered exterior is the ultimate physical expression of the ogre's life philosophy. He protects the soft center at all costs. And what of the core, the heart of the onion? In botany, this is the embryonic shoot, the future.
In the biology of the ogre, the deep subdermal systems are incredibly dense. To support the weight of these heavy, fluid-filled skin layers, the skeletal structure must be robust. But the skin is the hero of this anatomical story. Let us look closely at the hands, the primary manipulators of the ogre's world. The fingers are thick, sausage-like, yet capable of delicate tasks like pulling earwax to form a candle. How is this dexterity possible with such thick, layered skin? In humans, calluses reduce sensitivity. If our skin gets too thick, we lose the ability to feel fine textures. Yet the ogre displays surprising tactile feedback. Theory suggests that the nerve endings in an ogre do not stop at the dermis. Instead, specialized sensory pillars may extend through the layers, like fiber optic cables running through the walls of a building. These pillars would allow the ogre to feel a fly landing on his shoulder, despite the inches of keratinized plating protecting him. It is a complex, high-bandwidth sensory system encased in a tank's armor. This complexity refutes the common misconception that ogres are primitive or simple beasts. Biologically, they are far more complex than the humans who hunt them. A human is a soft sack of water held up by bone, wrapped in a thin, fragile parchment. An ogre is a fortress. An ogre is a geological marvel of biological sedimentation. Return to the image of the onion in your mind. Visualize the cross-section, the concentric circles, the geometry of it. It is a perfect circle, radiating outward. Nature loves this shape. We see it in the ripples of a pond, in the rings of Saturn, in the iris of the eye, and we see it in the ogre. When Shrek holds up that onion in the field, explaining himself to Donkey, he is holding up a mirror. He is not using a simile, he is holding a diagram. He is saying, "Look at this vegetable. Look at how it is built. It is built to survive underground. It is built to survive the frost. It is built to preserve its core against a world that wants to consume it.
This is what I am. The thickness of the skin also plays a role in the acoustic resonance of the creature. Have you noticed the timbre of an ogre's voice? It is deep, resonant, chest-felt. This is partially due to the size of the larynx, certainly. But consider the body as a sounding board. A violin resonates because of the wood's thickness and density. The ogre's layered body acts as a dampener for high frequencies, but a perfect resonator for low frequencies. When an ogre roars, the sound does not just come from the throat. It vibrates through the layers. The skin itself hums. It is a full-body acoustic event. This creates a terrifying effect for predators or knights, who feel the roar as much as they hear it.
Therefore, the ogre's territorial nature, his insistence on keeping intruders out of his swamp, is not merely grumpiness. It is a biological imperative to protect his life support system. He protects the swamp because the swamp protects the layers, and the layers protect the core. As we close this section of our analysis, let the complexity of this creature settle in your mind. Far from a simple monster, the ogre is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, a walking fortress of keratin and lipid, distinct, separated, shielded, and deeply, profoundly misunderstood. Just like an onion resting in the soil, waiting, layer upon layer upon layer, protecting the peace within. To understand the true nature of the events that would eventually unfold, we must first cast our gaze backward, before the donkey, before the dragon, and before the quest, to a time of quiet stagnation. We must examine the geography of the swamp not merely as a setting, but as a sovereign state of isolation. The swamp in the pre-Shrek narrative era was a place of profound ecological and social equilibrium. It was a pocket of the world that time seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps more accurately, a place that the world had actively chosen to ignore. Geographically, it sat on the periphery of the civilized kingdoms, a damp, fog-laden buffer zone where the map makers simply stopped drawing lines. For the ogre, this was not a place of exile, but a domain of absolute control. If we analyze the daily routine of the protagonist in these early years, we see a life defined by agrarian simplicity and territorial maintenance. The swamp was a self-sustaining ecosystem. The mud, rich in minerals and thermal heat, provided not only hygiene, but a form of psychological grounding. The eating of slugs, the maintenance of the perimeter, the crafting of candles from earwax, these were not merely gross-out gags intended for a younger audience, but evidence of a survivalist utilizing every resource at his disposal. It was a pre-industrial existence, a life lived in accordance with the natural, albeit grotesque, rhythms of the earth.
Shrek represented the old world, the chaotic, organic, and messy reality of nature that existed before the encroaching tide of civilization. He was the apex predator of his domain, and his "Beware of Ogre" signs were less a threat of violence and more a declaration of political neutrality. He wanted no part of the world, and for a long time, the world wanted no part of him. But while the swamp slept in its muddy stasis, the world outside was undergoing a radical transformation. A shift in the socio-political tectonic plates was occurring, centered around the rising city-state of Duloc. To understand Duloc and the inevitable collision between the ogre and the lord, we must analyze the rise of Lord Farquaad. History is often shaped by the insecurities of its leaders, and in the case of Farquaad, we see a ruler driven by a desperate need for order, symmetry, and height. The pre-Duloc landscape was likely a collection of loose feudal territories, filled with the whimsy and unpredictability of magic. Witches traded spells in the market, bears talked in the forests, and wolves walked on their hind legs. It was a world of fairy tale logic, where the rules of physics and biology were secondary to the rules of narrative and enchantment. Lord Farquaad represented the death of this whimsy. He was a modernist, a man of industry and structure. If Shrek represented the chaos of nature, Farquaad represented the tyranny of the artificial. We can infer that Farquaad's rise to power was not achieved through magical lineage. He was not a king, merely a lord, but through economic consolidation and a populist campaign against the other. He tapped into a simmering human fear of the unknown, the magical creatures, the giants, the talking pigs, the fairies. They were unpredictable. They were messy. And Farquaad offered the human population something seductive: predictability. He began the construction of Duloc, a project that was as much psychological as it was architectural. If one looks closely at the design of Duloc, it is a masterclass in overcompensation. The castle towers are impossibly high, stretching upward in a phallic assertion of dominance that the Lord himself physically lacked. The streets are not just clean, they are sterilized. The geometry is severe: right angles, perfect circles, manicured lawns where not a single blade of grass is permitted to grow taller than its neighbor. It is a planned community, a medieval suburbia. Note the presence of the turnstiles at the entrance. Note the souvenir shops. Note the information booth with its animatronic singing dolls. Duloc was not just a kingdom, it was a brand. Farquaad was attempting to commodify the feudal experience, stripping away the danger and the dirt of the Middle Ages, and replacing it with a sanitized theme park version of reality. This desire for perfection, for a world without blemishes,
is what inevitably led to the Great Displacement. This is a critical era in the lore, often overlooked as merely the setup for the film's first act. but it is, in reality, a massive geopolitical event. Farquaad's regime enacted a policy of segregation and deportation. The classification of fairy tale creature became a legal status, a mark of the undesirable. The logic was cold and binary. If it is magical, it is chaotic. If it is chaotic, it cannot exist in Duloc. We must consider the logistics of this operation. It required a military infrastructure. The Knights of Duloc, whom we later see competing in a tournament, were effectively repurposed as a paramilitary police force. They were not slaying dragons in the wild. They were raiding grandmothers' houses to arrest wolves. They were setting up checkpoints to catch wooden boys who could not tell lies. The economic impact of this must have been staggering. Bounties were placed on magical beings, creating a microeconomy of hunters and informants. We see this in the opening moments of the narrative, where lines of caged beings are processed for a few shillings. The commodification of life, the reduction of a sentient bear or a witch to a monetary value. This was the dark heart of the Duloc economy. And where does one put the displaced? Where does a ruler obsessed with cleanliness dump the trash of his society? He chooses the one place on the map that he deems worthless.
The one place that defies his desire for order. The swamp. This decision, the designation of Shrek's home as a refugee camp, is the spark that ignites the entire saga. It was an act of administrative arrogance. Farquaad did not know Shrek existed, or if he did, he considered the ogre to be just another feature of the landscape, no different than a stump or a stagnant pool. He did not anticipate that the swamp had a landlord. Let us pause for a moment and visualize the atmosphere of the swamp on the eve of this invasion. The sun sets, casting long purple shadows across the mossy ground. The air is thick with the scent of pine and peat. Shrek lights his fire, the crackle of dry wood, the only sound in the deepening twilight. He is content. He believes his isolation is absolute. He is unaware that miles away, a donkey is escaping capture, and a caravan of exiles is marching slowly toward his sanctuary. The contrast between these two worlds, the swamp and Duloc, cannot be overstated. One is vertical, built of cold gray stone, stretching toward the sky in a desperate plea for validation. The other is horizontal, hugging the earth, composed of warm browns and greens, content in its own existence. Farquaad's Duloc is a place of noise, but it is a controlled noise. The fanfare of trumpets, the loop of the Welcome to Duloc song, the cheers of the crowd prompted by cue cards. It is a performative society.
everyone is acting a part.
Even the mascot, the man in the giant Farquaad head costume, is a symbol of the layers of artifice that govern the city. In the swamp, there is no performance, there is only being. But the toxicity of Duloc was spreading. The very existence of such a rigid order required an external dumping ground for its disorder. This is a common theme in history, the civilized center pushing the savage elements to the fringes. But in this specific lore, the fringes were inhabited by a creature who was, in his own way, more civilized than the Lord in the high tower. Shrek's reaction to the arrival of the fairy tale creatures is telling. He is not frightened, he is annoyed. His grievance is not with the creatures themselves, though he finds them irritating, but with the violation of his boundaries. He is a creature of habit, and the sudden introduction of the 3 blind mice on his dinner table, or the wolf in his bed, is a disruption of his domestic sphere. Yet, there is a subtle irony here. Shrek, who claims to hate the world, becomes the protector of its most vulnerable outcasts. The creatures flock to him not because he is kind, but because he is strong. In a world where the Knights of Duloc represent the law, the ogre represents the only force capable of standing against it. He is a nuclear deterrent in a vest and tunic. As we drift deeper into this analysis, consider the psychological state of Lord Farquaad during this period. He sits in his castle, consulting the magic mirror. This is the one hypocrisy in his war on magic. He hates fairy tale creatures, yet he relies on a magical artifact to secure his legitimacy. He treats the mirror not as a sentient being, but as a piece of technology, a database to swipe through potential brides. He is lonely. We must acknowledge that. Beneath the cruelty and the short temper, there is a profound loneliness that mirrors Shrek's. Shrek chooses isolation to avoid rejection. Farquaad enforces isolation through his height and his status to avoid vulnerability. They are 2 sides of the same coin. The monster who looks like a man, and the man who acts like a monster. The pre-Shrek era effectively ends the moment Donkey bumps into Shrek. That collision is the catalyst. It brings the chaos of the outside world into the static silence of the swamp. Donkey is the bridge. He is a creature of the old world, a talking animal, who understands a new world. He knows the geography, the politics, the fear. He introduces Shrek to the reality of the situation, that the swamp is no longer a sovereign nation. It has been annexed by the bureaucracy of Duloc. The silence is broken. The fog is lifted. The political landscape has shifted, and the ogre can no longer ignore the horizon. Imagine the sounds of that first night of the occupation. The chatter of the elves, the snoring of the dwarves, the restless shifting of the witches. The swamp, once a cathedral of quiet, has become a tenement. The mist, usually a blanket of privacy, is now filled with the smoke of a dozen campfires. Shrek stands on the porch of his hut, looking out over the sea of displaced magical refugees. He realizes that to restore his peace, he must leave it. He must journey to the heart of the order that disrupted his chaos. He must go to Duloc. This sets the stage for the journey, a travelogue through the changing landscape of the fairy tale kingdom. From the organic, tangled roots of the woods through the sunflower fields that mask the industrialization of the realm, to the pristine cobblestone tyranny of Farquaad's capital. But before we embark on that journey, let us rest here for a moment, in the memory of the swamp as it was, before the noise, before the adventure. Just the mud, the moon, and the heavy rhythmic breathing of a creature at peace with his solitude. The socio-political complexities fade away, the architectural overcompensation of lords and kings dissolves, and we are left with the simple, grounding truth of the earth. Deep, quiet, green. The pre-Shrek era was a time of balance, a balance that is about to tip forever. And as the stars wheel overhead, looking down on the thatched roof of the ogre's hut, we can almost hear the turning of the page, the closing of the history book on the age of isolation, and the opening of the chapter on the age of heroes. But for now, the swamp is still. The water is calm, and the story waits. A singular, fragile thread of wood and rope that sways violently in the updrafts of heat. Architecturally, the keep is a paradox. It is vast, yet it was designed to house a single prisoner. When we analyze the sheer scale of the ruins, we see towering spires that pierce the smog, and a main keep that suggests a history long before Fiona's arrival. Who built this place? The masonry is ancient, worn smooth by centuries of heat and ash. It does not match the architectural styles of King Harold's kingdom, nor the manicured perfection of Duloc. It suggests an older civilization, perhaps a darker age of magic, where such structures were raised not by labor, but by sorcery. The bridge leads us into the heart of the complex. The interior is a cavernous void, illuminated only by the glow of the lava below and the occasional shaft of dim light from the high windows. It is here that we find the dragon, Elizabeth, a creature of immense power and surprising intelligence. In the taxonomy of fairy tale creatures, dragons are often reduced to mindless beasts or hoarders of gold. But the dragon of the keep is different. She is a warden, a jailer bound to the structure just as tightly as the prisoner she guards. When we observe the interior of the keep, we see the remnants of those who came before Shrek. The skeletons of knights, brave, foolish men who sought glory and found only fire. We must consider the tragedy of these figures.
They are not merely props. They are a historical record of failure. Each suit of armor represents a life, a name, a quest that ended in the silence of this volcanic tomb.
The sheer volume of remains suggests that Fiona's imprisonment was a well-known event in the realm, a magnet for the ambitious and a graveyard for the unprepared. But there is a deeper, more melancholic layer to the history of the tower, beyond the knights, beyond the dragon. We must speak of the highest room of the tallest tower. This specific designation is a trope, yes, but in a world where metaphors are literal, it is a precise set of coordinates designed to maximize isolation. The stairs winding up to Fiona's chamber are steep and narrow, worn by the passage of time, but not by feet, for no one visits. The dust lies thick and undisturbed. It is in the analysis of the tower's purpose that we uncover the stories of the princesses have failed. While Fiona is the only living prisoner we meet, the lore suggests she is part of a lineage of isolation. The tower is a recurring motif in the psychology of the fairy tale. It is a waiting room, a place of suspension where life is put on hold. We must ask ourselves, were there others? If we look closely at the background details of the keep, we see signs of habitation that predate Fiona's 20-year sentence. Faded tapestries that crumble at the touch, furniture that has rotted away to splinters. It is entirely possible that the Dragon's Keep has served as a prison for centuries, a repository for difficult royal daughters whose curses or indiscretions required them to be removed from the narrative. Imagine the silence of that room before Fiona arrived, the way the wind howls through the arrow slits, creating a mournful flute-like tone that resonates through the stone. For a princess in a tower, the greatest enemy is not the dragon outside, but the passage of time inside. We know from Fiona's behavior that she marked the days. We see the tally marks etched into the wall. This is a coping mechanism, a way to impose order on an endless, fluid existence. But what of those who stopped counting? The tragic history of the tower is the history of those who lost hope. In the study of folklore, the waiting princess is a passive figure. But biologically and psychologically, a human being cannot remain passive forever. The mind seeks stimulation, the heart seeks connection. When those are denied for decades, the result is a slow, quiet erosion of the self. There is a theory among deep lore historians that the dragon herself may be connected to this lineage of tragedy. We know that the dragon is female. We know she possesses a sense of romance and vanity, evidenced by her interactions with Donkey. Is it possible that the dragon was once a princess herself? A victim of a curse that was never broken?
A prisoner who waited so long and with such burning resentment that her form shifted to match the volatility of her environment. Consider the parallels. Fiona turns into an ogre, a creature of strength and perceived monstrosity. Perhaps the dragon is simply the final stage of a curse left to fester for too long. If true, this recontextualizes the entire dynamic of the keep. It makes the dragon not just a warden, but a cautionary tale.
She guards Fiona not out of malice, but perhaps out of a twisted sense of kinship. Or perhaps she is guarding the world from the potential of another transformation. Let us return to the room itself, the highest room. It is a small space, confined. The bed is ornate, draped in fabrics that have gathered the gray dust of the volcano. There is a window, the only connection to the outside world. Through this window, Fiona would have watched the seasons change, not by the turning of leaves, for there are no trees, but by the subtle shifts in the light, the length of the days, the intensity of the storms that roll over the volcanic peaks. We must consider the psychological resilience required to survive this, to wake up every morning, straighten the dress, and wait, expecting a savior who may never come. The script of her life was written for her by others, by her father, King Harold, by the fairy godmother. She was a piece on a game board, placed in a box until she was needed.
Armor. But unlike a traditional dragon hoard, this collection feels less like greed and more like accumulation. The detritus of centuries of visitors. It is a museum of failed narratives. The rusty sword of a prince who hesitated. The helmet of a duke who slipped. And perhaps the tiara of a princess who tried to climb down.
When Shrek and Donkey arrive, they disrupt a cycle that had been turning for generations. They treat the dragon not as a monster to be slain, but as an obstacle to be navigated, and eventually a being to be understood. This breaks the logic of the tower. The tower relies on the binary of hero and monster. When that binary dissolves, the walls of the prison become meaningless. But before that liberation, there was the waiting. Let us take a moment to meditate on the concept of waiting in this context. It is an active state of suffering. It is the maintenance of expectation in the face of zero evidence. For 20 years, Fiona practiced the kiss. She rehearsed the dialogue. She prepared for a moment that had a statistically low probability of occurring. This level of dedication is both admirable and heartbreaking. It speaks to the power of the indoctrination she received. She believed in the story more than she believed in her own reality. The secret history of the tower is ultimately a history of belief. The belief that someone will come. The belief that suffering has a purpose. The belief that the curse can be broken by an external force. It is a heavy atmosphere, thick and suffocating, like the ash that coats the bridge. As we leave the highest room and cross back over the rickety bridge, we leave the ghosts behind. The wind continues to howl. The lava continues to churn. Part 4. The Donkey Paradox. We arrive now at one of the most perplexing and biologically inconsistent elements of the entire Far, Far Away chronicle, the entity simply known as Donkey. To the casual observer, he is merely the comic relief, a chatterbox companion serving as a foil to the ogre's stoicism. But when we strip away the layers of humor and look at the taxonomy of this universe,
with a critical, academic eye, a disturbing anomaly begins to take shape, a paradox that suggests donkey is not a donkey at all. Consider for a moment the nature of speech in the Shrek universe. In this realm, animals do not typically speak. We see blind mice, we see pigs, we see a wolf. But these are creatures drawn from specific nursery rhymes where anthropomorphism is the defining trait. They walk on two legs, they wear clothes, they participate in society. Puss in Boots, for example, is technically a cat, but he functions as a musketeer. He is bipedal, he holds tools. Donkey is different. Biologically, he is a quadruped. He wears no clothes. He walks on all fours. He eats animal fodder. To the naked eye, he is indistinguishable from a standard Equus africanus asinus. And yet, he possesses the vocal cords, the vocabulary, and the complex emotional neuroses of a 20th century human male. Why? The answer may lie not in the swamp, but in a darker corner of folklore history.
We must turn our attention to the lore of Pinocchio, a character who we know exists within this specific continuity. We see Pinocchio in the first film. He is being sold by Geppetto. This confirms that the events of Carlo Collodi's narrative, or perhaps the Disney adaptation of it, have occurred within the timeline of Shrek. And if Pinocchio exists, then Pleasure Island exists. For those unfamiliar with the tragedy of Pleasure Island, it is essential to revisit the mechanics of that cursed place. It was a destination where wayward young boys were lured with promises of freedom, gambling, and excess. But the island was a trap. The atmosphere, or perhaps the water, carried a curse. Slowly, inevitably, the boys who indulged in the island's vices were stripped of their humanity. Their ears elongated, their spines shifted, their hands fused into hooves. They were transformed into donkeys. This is not speculation. This is the established canon of the Pinocchio narrative. The coachman, the villain presiding over the island, gathered these transformed boys to sell them into labor in the salt mines and circuses. But there was a screening process, a sorting mechanism based on the progression of the metamorphosis. The coachman would check the donkeys. If a boy had fully transformed, if he could only bray and kick, he was stripped of his clothes and crated for sale. He was gone. But if the boy could still speak, if the boy retained his human voice and his human mind, the coachman would cast him back. He was not yet ready for the mines. A talking donkey was a liability. It revealed the crime. Now, let us look at the opening moments of Shrek. We see an old woman attempting to sell Donkey to the Duloc knights. She claims he can talk. She is desperate to get rid of him. Donkey, in a moment of panic, refuses to speak, only to burst into song later while levitating via pixie dust. But consider his history before this moment. Where did he come from? He has no family. He has no herd. He is an outlier.
Furthermore, let us analyze his behavior.
Donkey does not act like an animal. He does not exhibit the instincts of prey. When threatened, he does not flee into the herd. He attempts to reason, to bargain, to charm. He suffers from a profound, almost pathological fear of silence and isolation. Why does Donkey talk so much? Why does he hum? Why does he refuse to leave Shrek's side even when rejected? It is the trauma response of a human being who is terrified of losing his mind. If he stops talking, the animal instincts might take over. If he stops engaging in higher-level conversation, the curse might complete itself. His incessant chatter is not just annoyance, it is a survival mechanism. He is verbally tethering himself to his humanity. When he meets Shrek, he clings to him not because Shrek is an ogre, but because Shrek is a bipedal, talking, humanoid figure who lives outside the law. Shrek represents safety from the authorities who might send him to the salt mines. Shrek represents a connection to a life that is more than just grazing. Consider the scene where Donkey and Shrek look at the stars. Shrek speaks of ogre constellations. Donkey attempts to find meaning in the stars but fails. He feels disconnected from the natural world because he is not of it. He is a displaced consciousness. This theory also resolves the biological impossibility of his later romance. In the sequel, Donkey falls in love with Dragon. On the surface, this is a visual gag.
But look deeper. If Donkey is actually a human soul trapped in a magical form, his attraction to the dragon, another highly intelligent, misunderstood magical creature, makes psychological sense. He is looking for a peer. He is looking for someone who transcends the biological limitations of their form. And what of the others? What of the boys from Pleasure Island who were not so lucky? The tragedy of the Shrek universe is often hidden in the background. If Donkey is indeed a survivor of that island, it implies a dark history for the entire region. It suggests that the fairy tale creatures rounded up by Lord Farquaad are not just magical pests, but displaced populations, victims of curses and transformations that the state refuses to acknowledge. When we see Pinocchio in the swamp, simply observing the chaos, one has to wonder, do he and Donkey know each other? Do they share a silent, horrific recognition? Pinocchio, the wooden boy who became real, and Donkey, the real boy who became a beast. Two sides of the same magical coin. Pinocchio's presence validates the magic system that created Donkey.
He is resilient, unnaturally so. Moreover, his dietary habits fluctuate. He expresses interest in waffles. He dreams of parfaits. While he eats vegetation when necessary, his cravings are distinctly human. He desires cooked food. He desires complex flavors. A standard donkey has no concept of a parfait. Layers. The concept of layers, which Shrek uses to describe ogres, is immediately understood by Donkey through the metaphor of cake and parfaits. This is a culinary memory.
Let us pause and consider the implications of the happily ever after potion in Shrek 2. When Shrek drinks the potion, he becomes human, and Donkey becomes a white stallion. This is the smoking gun. The potion grants the drinker their true love's form, or a form befitting their inner self. But the potion acts on the subject's biology. If Donkey were simply a donkey, a divine beauty version of him might be a majestic donkey. But he becomes a horse, a stallion. Why? In the logic of fairy tales and animal husbandry, the horse is the noble steed, the companion of knights, a creature of high status. But more importantly, the stallion is the romanticized version of the beast of burden. It is the form that allows him to be handsome. But notice, he does not become human. Why did the potion not turn him back into a boy? This is where the theory becomes truly melancholic. The potion gives you what you need for your happily ever after. By the events of the second film, Donkey has accepted his fate. He has found love with Dragon. He has found purpose with Shrek. He no longer sees himself as the lost boy from Pleasure Island. He sees himself as the noble companion. The potion reflects his self-perception. He has internalized the animal form, but he wishes to be the best version of it. He wishes to be a stallion, not a donkey, because a stallion is worthy of a dragon. The boy is gone. The transformation is complete.
The potion could not revert him because the human identity has been subsumed by the persona he built to survive. So when we watch the films, when we hear the rapid-fire jokes, the singing, the constant need for validation, we must listen with a new understanding. We are hearing the echoes of a lost childhood. We are hearing a consciousness fighting against the void. Donkey is the ultimate survivor of the fairy tale world. He escaped the salt mines. He escaped the silence. He forged a new identity in a hostile world that views him as livestock. It forces us to re-evaluate the economy of the Shrek universe. How many other talking animals are actually cursed humans? Is the Frog King the only one? Or is the countryside littered with the victims of witches, islands, and dark magic, all bleeding and barking, hoping someone will listen long enough to hear a human word? The donkey paradox serves as a bridge between the whimsical and the horrific. It grounds the fantastical elements of Shrek in a rigid biological reality. It reminds us that in this world, magic is not just sparkles and flight. It is mutagenesis. It is body modification. It is the loss of self. And yet, Donkey is happy. He finds joy. He finds friendship. Perhaps the ultimate lesson of the donkey paradox is not the horror of the transformation, but the resilience of the spirit. Even when stripped of his skin, his hands, and his history, he refuses to be silent. He refuses to be a beast of burden.
He insists on being a friend.
In the quiet of the swamp, when the sun goes down and the other creatures have gone to sleep, one can imagine Donkey staying awake a little longer than the rest, watching the fire, humming a tune, remembering a life before the hooves, and then letting it go, closing his eyes, and finally, peacefully, drifting into the sleep of the contented.
Part 5. Corporate Magic in Far, Far Away. To understand the true geopolitical landscape of the Shrek universe, we must look beyond the swamps and the dragon-guarded keeps. We must look to the skyline of Far, Far Away, and specifically to the billowing purple smoke of its industrial sector. Here lies the heart of a different kind of power, not the feudal power of kings like Harold who rule by lineage and decree, but the economic power of the fairy godmother who rules by supply, demand, and the ironclad monopoly on happiness itself. In the traditional folklore from which these stories emerge, magic is wild, it is unpredictable. It is found in the roots of trees, in the whispers of the wind, or in the chance encounter with a benevolent spirit. However, in the realm of Far, Far Away, we see a distinct shift, a transition from the chaotic magic of the ancient world to the ordered, commodified magic of the modern era. This is the industrialization of the fairy tale. At the center of this industrial complex sits the fairy godmother's cottage, a structure that presents a deceptive facade to the world. From the exterior, it appears as a whimsical abode nestled in the woods, seemingly constructed from timber and thatch. It is designed to evoke a sense of nostalgia, a comforting callback to the cottagecore aesthetics of simpler times. But this is merely branding. It is the corporate headquarters disguised as a home.
Once one crosses the threshold and bypasses the reception area, staffed, we must note, by administrative assistants managing distinct appointments, we enter the true heart of the operation, the factory floor. Here, the whimsical nature of magic is stripped away to reveal a marvel of engineering and logistics. We see vast, cavernous spaces filled with the hum of machinery, intricate systems of conveyor belts, massive vats of bubbling reagents, and the rhythmic clanking of glass against metal. This is not a wizard's tower. It is a manufacturing plant. The scale of production suggests that the fairy godmother is not merely serving a few damsels in distress. She is supplying a kingdom, perhaps a continent. The sheer volume of potions visible in the background of these scenes implies a mass market. This is magic for the consumer class. Let us consider the labor force. The factory is staffed not by magical constructs, but by elves. These are not the joyful, toy-making elves of northern folklore, nor are they the ethereal, high fantasy elves of Tolkien. They are industrial workers. We see them managing hazardous materials, operating heavy machinery, and presumably working in shifts to keep the fires of the cauldrons burning. The presence of a foreman and the structured nature of their tasks indicates a hierarchy, a labor union, a system of employment that mirrors our own industrial revolution.
The product being manufactured here is ostensibly potions. But if we analyze the marketing, the true product is happily ever after. The genius of the fairy godmother's business model lies in the commodification of destiny. In a traditional story, a happily ever after is earned through virtue, bravery, or trial. In the economy of Far, Far Away, it is purchased. It is bottled. It is a liquid asset. Take a moment to visualize the potion room. It is a library of chemical solutions. The lighting is dim, filtered through the thousands of colored liquids in glass bottles, casting a stained glass glow across the floor. There is a stillness here, a heavy, vaporous silence, broken only by the settling of sediments in the vials. Each bottle represents a shortcut, a circumvention of the natural narrative. There is the handsome potion, the happily ever after elixir, vials labeled with specific afflictions and desires. This inventory suggests that for every human, or ogre, in security, the fairy godmother has synthesized a chemical solution. She has identified the pain points of the population, the desire for beauty, for status, for love, and she has created a monopoly on the cure. The happily ever after potion itself warrants a deep biological analysis. When we observe its effects on Shrek and Fiona, we are witnessing a rapid, systemic genetic rewrite. The potion does not merely cast an illusion.
It fundamentally alters the biological structure of the consumer. It changes bone density, muscle mass, skin pigmentation, and facial structure. This is not simple spell casting. This is advanced bioalchemy. The potion is described as affecting not just the drinker, but their true love as well. This implies a quantum entanglement aspect to the magic, a non-local interaction where the chemical ingestion by one subject triggers a biological metamorphosis in another subject miles away. The industrial capability to manufacture such a substance on a mass scale is staggering. It suggests that the fairy godmother possesses knowledge of magical physics that far outstrips the capabilities of Merlin or any other wizard in the lore. But let us look at the bottle itself, the packaging. It is elegant, refined, clearly designed for a high-end market. The branding is paramount. But like all corporate products, there are terms and conditions. The midnight clause is a recurring theme in the godmother's products. The effects are temporary unless sealed by true love's kiss. From a business perspective, this is brilliant. It creates a trial period. It allows the user to experience the premium version of their life, the life of a human, a noble, a beauty, and then threatens to revoke it. This creates dependency. It ensures that the consumer remains anxious, compliant, and reliant on the narrative that the godmother controls.
If the kiss does not happen, the user reverts, likely prompting them to return to the factory for another solution, another deal, another purchase. The fairy godmother herself operates less like a magical guardian and more like a CEO of a conglomerate. Her carriage is her limousine, her wand is her pen, her wishes are contracts. We see this in her dealings with King Harold,
Their relationship is not based on loyalty or friendship. It is based on blackmail and debt. Harold is a client who is in arrears. The industrialization of magic also implies the existence of a supply chain. To maintain the vats we see in the factory requires raw materials: toadstools, nightshade, dragon scales, the tears of a lover. These ingredients must be sourced, harvested, and transported to far, far away. This suggests a vast network of resource extraction that the fairy godmother controls. Imagine the logistics of sourcing Wind of the Wolf or moonlight. The factory must have specialized collectors, condensers, storage units capable of holding ethereal substances. The infrastructure required to maintain this level of production is invisible to the citizens of the kingdom, yet it dictates their lives. Furthermore, the location of the factory within the woods is strategic. It is secluded enough to hide the industrial smog, yet close enough to the palace to maintain political influence.
The purple smoke that rises from the chimneys is a visual motif of her power. It stains the sky, a constant reminder that magic is being burned, processed, and refined. We must also consider the security measures of the facility. The potion room is highly restricted. The potion of happily ever after is kept in a high security vault, protected by complex mechanisms. This indicates that the godmother is aware of the value of her intellectual property. She is guarding trade secrets. If the formula for happily ever after were to become public domain, her empire would collapse. Scarcity is the key to her wealth. If everyone could brew their own happiness, if everyone could transform themselves into their ideal self in their own kitchen, the social hierarchy of far, far away would dissolve. The fairy godmother maintains the status quo by keeping the means of magical production firmly under her control. She decides who gets to be a prince and who remains a frog. In this light, Shrek's intrusion into the factory is not just a heist, it is an act of industrial espionage. It is a disruption of the market. When Shrek and his companions enter the factory, they are struck by the sheer complexity of the operation. The conveyor belts moving endless lines of bottles, the vats of glowing, viscous fluids. It is a sensory overload of industrial magic. The soundscape of the factory is important to note.
The bubbling is deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The steam hisses with a methodical precision. It extends to the narrative itself. She possesses a library of books, stories of everyone in the kingdom. This surveillance apparatus allows her to predict market trends. She knows who is unhappy, who is desperate, who is vulnerable to her sales pitch. She creates the problem by enforcing rigid beauty standards and social hierarchies, and then she sells the solution. Consider the scene where she creates a bubble to float around in, or turns the furniture into animated servants. This casual use of high-level magic demonstrates her immense surplus of power. She uses magic for comfort, for aesthetics, for intimidation. She has so much magical capital that she can afford to be frivolous with it, unlike the other magical creatures of the realm who must use their abilities for survival. The industrial complex of Far, Far Away is a reflection of a society that has lost touch with the roots of its own mythology. They have traded the mystery of the forest for the certainty of the bottle. They prefer the guaranteed manufactured ending over the risky, authentic journey. As we drift deeper into the implications of this, we realize that the fairy godmother is the ultimate antagonist, not because she is evil in a chaotic sense, but because she represents the system. She is the institution that insists there is only one way to be happy, only one way to look, only one way to end the story. And that way is expensive, exclusive,
and controlled by her. The factory continues to hum. The belts continue to turn. The glass bottles continue to fill, one by one, drop by drop, preserving the hopes of a kingdom in suspended animation, waiting for the cork to be popped, waiting for the consumer to drink, waiting for the transaction to be complete. The purple smoke drifts over the trees, blending with the night sky, a silent testament to the industry of dreams. The gears of the fairy tale grind on, slow, steady, and relentless. The magic is bottled, the books are balanced, and the factory never sleeps, even as we do. Let the image of the glowing vats fade in your mind, the rhythmic clinking of the glass bottles softening into the distance, the steam dissipating into the cool night air, leaving only the quiet, the dark, and the deep, restful silence of the swamp. Far away from the noise of the industry, far away from the demands of the market, just the quiet and the dark and the sleep.
We now turn our attention to the fabric of reality itself, specifically the fragile nature of time within the Shrek universe, and how easily the tapestry of history can be unraveled by a single signature on a piece of parchment. This brings us to the events chronicled in Shrek Forever After, a text that serves not merely as a conclusion to the cinematic saga, but as a profound exploration of multiverse theory, determinism, and the chaotic potential of Rumpelstiltskin's magic. To understand the alternate timeline, or what we might call the Rumpelverse, we must first analyze the catalyst, Rumpelstiltskin himself. Unlike the other antagonists we have discussed, such as Lord Farquaad or the fairy godmother, Rumpelstiltskin does not rely on political power or social influence initially. He operates on the principles of transactional magic, deeply rooted in the ancient laws of folklore. His power is binding, specific, and legalistic. The contract presented to Shrek is a masterpiece of metaphysical entrapment. It operates on the law of equivalent exchange,
a concept found in alchemy and historical witchcraft. Shrek desires a day of freedom, a return to the primal, unburdened existence of an ogre, before the complications of domesticity and celebrity. In exchange, Rumpelstiltskin demands a day from Shrek's past, seemingly a harmless trade. However,
the specific day chosen, the day of Shrek's birth, creates a temporal paradox that shatters the linear progression of the timeline. When Shrek signs the contract, the ink does not merely dry, it rewrites the causal chain of the universe. We observe the world dissolving, turning into a gray void before reconstituting itself into a darker, grittier iteration of far, far away. This is not an illusion. It is a tangible, physical reality, a divergent timeline created by the removal of a single keystone event, the existence of Shrek. In this new reality, the atmosphere is oppressive. The color palette shifts from the lush greens and vibrant golds of the original timeline to muted sepias, rusts, and grays. It is a world in decay, governed by fear and the erratic whims of Rumpelstiltskin, who has seized control of the kingdom. Here, we see the butterfly effect in its most dramatic form. Without Shrek to rescue Fiona from the Dragon's Keep, the king and queen, desperate and out of options, signed their kingdom away to Rumpelstiltskin to save their daughter. They vanished, leaving the trickster king to rule. Let us drift through this alternate landscape and observe the fate of the souls inhabiting it. The most tragic alterations are found in those closest to Shrek. Consider the character of Donkey. In the Prime timeline, Donkey is a confident, albeit talkative, companion, bonded by loyalty and friendship. In the Rumpleverse, he is a beast of burden, pulling carts for witches. He is skittish, fearful, and deeply cynical. His fur is matted, his eyes darting with anxiety. This suggests that Donkey's personality, his very spark, was not innate, but was nurtured through his connection with Shrek. Without that connection, he was reduced to the status of a common animal, barely surviving on the fringes of society. Then there is Puss in Boots. In this reality, Puss has retired from the life of a mercenary. He has become a pampered house cat, obese and lethargic, trading his sword for a bowl of pink ribbon. This lost his warrior's edge. He succumbed to comfort, suffocated by luxury. But the most profound divergence, the centerpiece of this alternate reality, is the Princess Fiona. In the absence of a savior, Fiona did not perish in the tower, nor did she wait indefinitely. She saved herself. This timeline presents a Fiona who is hardened, militaristic, and deeply pragmatic. She is the leader of the ogre resistance,
a subterranean guerrilla force dedicated to overthrowing Rumpelstiltskin. We must pause to appreciate the visual storytelling here. Fiona's hair is wild and unkempt. She wears primitive armor fashioned from scraps, and her demeanor is stoic. She has embraced her ogre form permanently, seemingly rejecting the human facade that caused her so much pain in her youth. This version of Fiona is a study in survivalism. She realized that the fairy tale narrative was a lie. that no Prince Charming was coming, and so she forged her own destiny through steel and strategy. The existence of the ogre resistance itself offers a glimpse into the biology and sociology of ogres in this universe. In the Prime timeline, Shrek believed he was an anomaly, largely alone. In the Rumpleverse, we see hundreds of ogres, organized, disciplined, and culturally distinct. They have a hierarchy, a system of communication, and a shared warrior culture. This suggests that ogres were always present in the shadows of far, far away. But in the Prime timeline, they remained scattered and isolated. It took the tyranny of Rumpelstiltskin to unite them, paradoxically creating a stronger ogre society through oppression. As Shrek navigates this world, he is a ghost, a man who technically does not exist. This creates a deep existential melancholia that permeates the narrative. He walks through his old home in the swamp, only to find it dry, barren,
and devoid of life. The stump where he would sit is gone. The mud is cracked. It is a physical manifestation of his erasure. He is witnessing a world that has moved on without him, and in doing so, has become worse. The mechanism of the contract, however, contains an exit clause, deeply buried in the magical syntax, true love's kiss. This is a recurring constant in the Shrek universe, a universal law that supersedes even the most powerful dark magic. Rumpelstiltskin, arrogant in his victory, believed that because Shrek and Fiona were strangers in this timeline, such a kiss was impossible. He underestimated the trans-temporal nature of their bond. The romance in Shrek Forever After is unique because it is not a story of falling in love, but of re-earning love. Shrek retains his memories. He knows the depth of what he has lost. Fiona, however, views him with suspicion. To her, he is just another soldier, perhaps a bit mad. The tragedy lies in the asymmetry of their knowledge. Shrek must navigate the emotional landscape of a woman he has been married to for years, but who is meeting him for the first time. He must court her not as a princess, but as a warrior. We see them spar, a physical dance of combat that replaces the traditional courtship rituals. In this timeline, affection is shown through competence, strength, and mutual survival. When they eventually connect, it is born of shared struggle against the witches and Rumpelstiltskin's forces. Now, let us consider the climax of this timeline, the siege of the castle, the ogre resistance captured and awaiting execution, represents the final stand of the magical creatures. Shrek's decision to sacrifice himself, surrendering to Rumpelstiltskin to spare the others, is the turning point. In the Prime timeline, Shrek learned to live for others. In this timeline, he learns to die for them. The metaphysics of the final moments are staggering. As the sun rises, marking the end of the 24-hour period granted by the contract, Shrek begins to fade. His existence is being corrected by the universe. He is a temporal anomaly that cannot sustain itself. We watch as his hand becomes transparent, his physical form turning into light and dust.
It is a gentle yet terrifying process of deletion. However, just before the final dissolution, the kiss occurs. The kiss between Shrek and the warrior Fiona. This act triggers the failsafe. The magical shockwave that follows is depicted visually as a burst of white light, shattering the physical structure of the Rumpleverse. The castle walls crumble, not into rubble, but into the void. The colors bleed out. The sounds of battle are silenced. This leads us to a fascinating theoretical question. What happens to the Rumpleverse after the reset? Does it cease to exist entirely?
Or does it branch off as a dead timeline floating somewhere in the multiverse? The warrior Fiona, the domesticated puss, the cart-pulling donkey, do they simply vanish? The film suggests a total overwrite. The reality folds back in on itself, restoring the prime timeline to the exact moment Shrek signed the contract. When Shrek awakens back at the birthday party, the colors have returned. The noise is overwhelming, but now it is welcomed. The contrast between the silence of the void and the chaos of the party highlights the vibrancy of life. Shrek looks at his family, at the guests, with a new perceptual lens. He has lived a lifetime in a day. He has seen the dark alternative, and the mundane frustrations of his life are now revealed to be precious luxuries. This journey through the alternate timeline serves a crucial function in the lore. It validates the importance of the protagonist, essentially proving that Shrek is not merely a random ogre, but the linchpin of the entire kingdom's history. Without him, the balance of power shifts irrevocably towards evil. The happily ever after was not a guarantee, it was a construct maintained by his presence. Furthermore, the Rumpelstiltskin contract introduces the concept of magical legalism to the world-building. We learn that magic in this universe is bureaucratic. It requires paperwork, ink, and consent.
Even if that consent is obtained through trickery. This adds a layer of mundane realism to the fantasy, framing magic not just as a mystical force, but as a commodity that can be traded, bartered, and weaponized through legislation. The witches employed by Rumpelstiltskin in the alternate timeline also deserve a moment of analysis. They are distinct from the fairy godmother, who used magic for glamour and social climbing. These witches are feral, elementally chaotic, using pumpkins as grenades and brooms as fighter jets. They represent the untamed, dangerous side of magic that Shrek usually keeps at bay. In the Rumpleverse, they are the enforcers of the state, creating a society where magic is a tool of oppression rather than wonder. The architectural changes of the castle in the alternate timeline reflect this shift. The pristine, Disney-esque spires of Far, Far Away are retrofitted with spikes, chains, and dark banners. It becomes a fortress of solitude for Rumpelstiltskin, reflecting his own hollow victory. He has everything he wanted, yet he is surrounded by sycophants and enemies. The perfect world he crafted is joyless, purely functional, and aesthetically dead. As we conclude our examination of this fractured reality, we are left with the lingering implication of memory. Does Fiona retain any subconscious memory of her time as a warrior leader? Does Puss feel a phantom hunger?
The script implies that only Shrek remembers, bearing the burden of 2 lifetimes. This grants him
a wisdom, a quietude that defines his character in the final moments of the franchise. He is no longer fighting against his narrative. He has seen the page turned, and he has chosen to write his own story once again. The timeline is restored. The paradox is resolved. The ink on the contract fades, leaving the parchment blank. But the exploration of this what-if scenario provides the deepest insight into the ecosystem of the Shrek universe. It is a world where destiny is pliable, where love is a force of physics, and where existence itself is a privilege, not a right. We drift away from the dark skies of the Rumpleverse, letting the gray clouds part, returning to the warm, golden light of the swamp. The stillness returns. The water ripples gently, undisturbed by the chaos of a world that almost was, but never truly came to be. The timeline flows on, linear, steady, and calm, just as it should be.
Part 7. The Eternal Swamp. It is a place where time seems to slow down, where the water sits still, mirroring the sky, undisturbed by the currents of destiny. For Shrek, the swamp is a rejection of the hero's journey. It is a declaration that he is enough as he is, that he requires no transformation, no redemption, and no external validation. This brings us to the central philosophical conflict of the ogre's existence, the tension between isolation and community. For years, perhaps decades, Shrek lived in what we might call the solitude of the monster. There is a certain peace in being the monster, a clarity of purpose. When the villagers come with their pitchforks and torches, the dynamic is simple. They scream, he roars, they run. It is a transactional relationship. They get their thrill of fear, and he gets the reinforcement of his boundaries. He leans into the stereotype because it is efficient. It keeps the world at arm's length. As he tells Donkey during that pivotal night under the stars, they judge me before they even know me. That's why I'm better off alone. Here we see the defensive architecture of the ogre's mind. Isolation is not his natural state, but rather an acquired survival mechanism. It is a callus formed over a wound. The ogre retreats to the swamp, not because he hates the world, but because the world has told him he has no place in it. The swamp is the only place where he is the protagonist of his own life, rather than the antagonist of someone else's story.
But the universe of Shrek, much like our own, abhors a vacuum. Solitude, no matter how carefully constructed, is fragile. It is easily punctured by the arrival of the other. First, it is Donkey, then the refugees of Duloc, then Fiona. Each arrival represents a violation of the swamp's borders, but also a challenge to Shrek's philosophy of isolation. The tragedy and the beauty of the ogre's life is that he is biologically and emotionally capable of profound connection, yet he is socially conditioned to reject it. We must meditate on the metaphor of the onion. Ogres are like onions. It is the franchise's most enduring image, and for good reason. It is a perfect encapsulation of the defensive ego. An onion does not have a hard, impenetrable pit at its center. It is layers all the way down. To peel an onion is an act of destruction. You must tear away the outer skin to reveal the tender flesh beneath, and the act often induces tears. Shrek's layers are his history. The outer layer is the roaring beast. The next layer is the sarcastic hermit. Deeper still is the lonely soul who wishes to be loved but fears rejection. And at the very center, perhaps there is nothing but the raw desire for acceptance. By allowing Donkey and Fiona to peel back these layers, Shrek exposes himself to the very pain he sought to avoid in the mud of the swamp. This transition from the solitary ogre to the communal ogre is not seamless. It is fraught with friction.
We see this most clearly in Shrek 2 and Shrek the Third. The swamp, once a place of silence, becomes a place of noise. It becomes a home for a wife, for a best friend, eventually for children. The ecosystem is disrupted. There is a profound melancholy in the realization that gaining a family means losing the sanctuary of the self. The silence of the swamp is gone forever. The stillness of the water is broken by the chaotic splashing of life. For a creature of habit like Shrek, this is a form of death, the death of the solitary self. We must consider the psychological crisis presented in Shrek Forever After. This film, often overlooked, provides the deepest dive into the ogre's regret. Shrek signs a contract to be a real ogre again for just one day. He yearns for the time before the noise, before the responsibilities, before the community. He wants to return to the primordial mud. He wants to be feared, not celebrated. He wants the silence. This desire is not born of malice toward his family. It is born of an existential exhaustion. It is the introvert's plea for a moment of quiet in a world that never stops talking. It is the realization that happily ever after is not a destination, but a relentless maintenance of relationships, social obligations, and domestic labor. When Shrek enters the alternate timeline where he never rescued Fiona, where he never met Donkey, he finds his swamp exactly as he left it. It is empty. It is quiet. It is terrifying.
In this alternate reality, the swamp has lost its warmth. Without the memory of connection, the solitude is no longer a sanctuary, it is a prison. The mud is just cold dirt. The silence is not peaceful, it is hollow. This is the critical philosophical realization. The swamp only has value as a retreat
if there is something to retreat from. Without the contrast of community, isolation loses its meaning. The ogre needs the village just as much as the village needs the ogre. Let us look deeper into the biology of this fictional species. Ogres are long-lived, resilient, and deeply connected to the earth. They are in many ways the guardians of the natural order, standing in opposition to the synthetic perfection of Lord Farquaad's Duloc, or the superficial glamour of the fairy godmother's empire. Farquaad wants to pave the world, the fairy godmother wants to enchant it. Shrek just wants it to be real. The swamp is the ultimate expression of reality. It is messy, it smells, it is full of bugs and weeds and rot. But from that rot comes life. It is a cycle of decay and rebirth that the sterile stone of a castle cannot replicate. By choosing to live in the swamp, the ogre aligns himself with the truth of existence, that life is imperfect, that it is sometimes gross, and that there is beauty in the breakdown. When Shrek invites others into the swamp, he is not just sharing his home, he is inviting them to accept their own messiness.
He teaches Fiona that she does not need to be the pristine princess in the tower. She can be an ogress. She can belch. She can fight. She can be real. He teaches Donkey that he does not need to be a noble steed. He can just be a donkey, annoying and loyal and loud. The community that forms in the swamp is a community of outcasts. It is a found family built not on blood or royal decree, but on the shared experience of not fitting in. Pinocchio, the wolf, the pigs, the dragon, they all find a gravity around Shrek. He becomes the reluctant patriarch of the weird. And yet, the longing for the solitary mud never truly leaves him. It is a quiet hum in the back of his mind. As we drift deeper into this analysis, imagine the sensory experience of the swamp at night. The heavy mist rolling off the water, the sound of crickets and bullfrogs creating a rhythmic, hypnotic drone. The light of the moon filtering through the twisted branches of the mangrove trees, casting long, still shadows. In this environment, the ogre sits. He is no longer the monster of the first act, nor is he the harried father of the later chapters. He is simply a being, existing in the space between. The philosophical conclusion of Shrek's journey is not that he rejects the swamp for the castle. He rejects the castle for the swamp, but he changes the definition of what the swamp is. In the beginning, the swamp was a fortress. By the end, the swamp is a garden.
A fortress is designed to keep things out. A garden is designed to let things grow. By allowing his boundaries to become permeable, Shrek transforms his isolation into insulation. He creates a safe space, not just for himself, but for those he loves. However, the cost of this transformation is the loss of the eternal swamp, the idea of a place that never changes. By bringing love into the swamp, he introduces the passage of time. Children grow up. Parents grow old. The mud dries and refills with the seasons. The stasis is broken. There is a somber beauty in this. The ogre accepts mortality. He accepts that his layers will continue to be peeled away until there is nothing left. Think of the final shots of the saga, the party, the music, the gathering of friends. It is loud and chaotic, but if you look closely at Shrek's eyes, there is a softness there that was not present in the beginning. He has made peace with the noise. But let us return to the mud one last time. Imagine the feeling of sinking into it, the weight of the earth pressing against you, holding you up. It is a return to the womb of the world. For the ogre, the mud is the great equalizer. Kings and peasants alike would sink in the bog. In the swamp, social status dissolves. There is only survival and the simple pleasure of existence. The eternal swamp is therefore a state of mind. It is the capacity to find comfort in one's own skin, regardless of what the world says that skin should look like.
It is the ability to sit in the mess of life and say, "This is mine." Shrek's legacy is not that he became a hero. It is that he remained an ogre. He did not let the narrative scrub him clean. He forced the narrative to get dirty. He dragged the fairy tale into the mud and showed us that the mud is where the real magic happens. As we close this section of our deep dive, let the image of the swamp settle in your mind. Green, quiet, ancient. A place where you are not judged. A place where you do not need to perform. A place where you can simply be. The keep out signs are gone now. Or perhaps they have simply been turned around. Instead of facing outward, warning the world to stay away, they face inward, reminding the occupant that he is safe, that he is home. The water is still. The mist is rising. The onions are growing in the dark, rich soil, adding layer upon layer in the silence of the night. This is the peace of the ogre. This is the promise of the swamp. It is not an escape from reality, but a deeper immersion into it. And in that immersion, in that heavy, warm, encompassing darkness, there is rest. The ecosystem continues to breathe around him. The symbiotic relationship between the ogre and the land is complete. He is the swamp, and the swamp is him. It is a bond that transcends the written word of the storybooks. It is primal. It is eternal. And as the moon climbs higher over the canopy of trees, illuminating the bubbles rising from the depths of the bog, we understand that the story was never really about a quest for a princess. It was a quest for peace. A peace that was there all along, waiting beneath the surface, covered in layers, waiting to be found. The stillness returns. The narrative slows. The mud settles. End of Part 7.